I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by one of the Democrats who occasionally comes along to join me and talk a little politics, Senator Chris Coons of the great state of Delaware, one of the reasonable Democrats. Good morning, Senator. Welcome back. Merry Christmas to you.
Good morning, Hugh. Merry Christmas. It's a great last week here in the Senate as we take up and vote on a number of important bills this week. It's good to be on with you again.
Well, thank you. I want to begin by asking you about a matter of agreement. You are a hawk on China. I'm a hawk on China. Last time that President-elect Trump was on the program, he promised to try and get Jimmy Lai out. Do you think that will be a bipartisan effort with the Chinese Communist Party by both Republicans and Democrats?
Yes, I've worked across the aisle on a number of different issues to strengthen our efforts to both deter countries from taking Americans hostage or wrongfully detaining them or arresting them, and to help support the families and those hostages once they're released. Hugh, it might surprise you, actually it might not surprise you, that the first thing that an American gets when they come back from being held hostage for years overseas is a bill from the IRS. Your unpaid taxes, including fines and fees,
I did not know
is
that.
the first thing you get. And I have a bipartisan bill that has passed the Senate unanimously, and we're trying to get it through the House. Same thing with your credit score. If you think about Paul Whelan, for example, the Marine who was held in Russia for years, or three Americans who were recently released from China, or Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter who was released from Russia. When they come home, if it's been a long time, their credit score is ruined. They're facing tens of thousands of dollars of tax fines and fees. And this is not a huge number of people. This is something we should do for Americans who are deemed wrongfully detained and imprisoned, and make sure that when they come home, they and their families get the welcome and the support they deserve, not a tax bill.
Now, there is bipartisan agreement there, but I want to go back
Yeah.
to Jimmy Lai, who's not, of course, American. He's a British citizen, and he's a Chinese citizen, but he's probably the world's most famous dissident, and Xi doesn't want to let him go. Do you think Trump can get him out?
I certainly hope so. The person who's been named to be his new special envoy for hostage affairs, Adam Bowler, is someone I worked well with when he led the DFC in the first Trump administration. We've already talked about the tools that we might be able to give him legislatively to strengthen his deterrent capabilities and to make sure that we're taking care of families. So I certainly hope so. It's a case I'll be digging into and making sure I can work with who I think will likely be our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. And I'm meeting later this week, I believe, with Elise Stefanik, excuse me, who's been nominated to be our UN ambassador. The core team that Trump is putting forward to be National Security Advisor, UN ambassador, and Secretary of State are folks I look forward to meeting with and, where possible, working with.
I think that's good news. On national security, it's good news. Now I want to talk some politics with you. You might be old enough to actually have worked with Charles Manat in some capacity. I did. I knew him in California. Did you know Charles Manat at all?
I certainly knew who he was. I don't remember if I met him in the 80s, but I certainly knew who he was.
He took over your party in 1981, and he stayed for 4 years. And then Paul Kirk took it over, and he stayed for 4 years. And then Ron Brown came, and he stayed for 4 years. Democrats were out of power for 12 years after President Carter because of inflation. Do you think your party is in for that long of an exile from executive branch authority?
I certainly hope not, but it's going to come down to whether we show that we are listening to the message of this election. Across 7 swing states, 240,000 votes, if they moved, from President-elect Trump to Vice President Harris across the 3 key states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, we'd be talking about inaugurating Vice President Harris. So this was not a crushing loss, but it was broad, and it was broad and deep in certain demographics that Democrats expect to come out and vote for us. They're not listening to what we're saying, and there's some issues around certainly inflation, people believing that we're fighting for them and we're on their side, and people buying into our economic agenda and our overall agenda. So we could be in the wilderness for 12 years again if we don't listen, or we can show that we're open and humble and willing to work through the lessons of this election. If that happens, I think you could see a fairly quick turnaround.
Now, there are two areas, Senator. One is gender ideology, and the other is the border, about which I have not seen any Democrat express any willingness to deal with the reality of November. What do you think about both boys playing girls sports and building the wall on the border?
I think you'll see some Democrats eager, certainly willing to talk about border security and finding ways to make sure that we can tell our communities that folks who are crossing the border are doing so legally and having been screened appropriately. The idea that we have people who we can't trace and we don't know where they're from and we're not sure where they're going crossing our border is a national security risk. I'll remind you, there was a hard-fought, rough-hewn agreement between Senator Langford, a friend of mine, Senator Sinema, Senator Murphy, that Democrats were willing to vote for that included significant investments in physical security at the border, increased funding for screening, for deportations, for the judicial system to expedite hearings for folks who are detained. I think you'll see some embrace of that direction. I do think there's a lot of concern. There is a lot of concern among Democrats about how broad mass deportations will go. Some of the talk among those in the president-elect's circle about undoing birthright citizenship or putting at risk those who've been here for decades and have businesses and families and are contributing members of society. If President Trump prioritizes finding and deporting those who commit crimes in the United States, he'll get enthusiastic support. If he prioritizes securing the border in a way that allows us to know who's coming across our border, he'll get support.
Now, Senator, what about boys playing girls sports?
You know, we had a hearing yesterday in the Senate on sports gambling. And while I wasn't at that hearing, what was reported back to me was that in a question about that, how big of an issue is this? The head of the NCAA said out of 50,000 active sports-playing college students, there are fewer than 100 who are transgender NCAA athletes. I understand why it raises concerns for parents and for athletes. And I think our challenge in talking about and engaging around trans issues is first to recognize that young people who have gender dysphoria are some of the most vulnerable, some of the most often abused and picked on, some of the most likely to commit suicide of young people in America. And we should have this conversation about trans young people and young adults with some empathy and some respect. At the same time, I understand as a parent who had children in sports how there are concerns by parents and there are concerns by athletes. And I think this is something that's much more amenable to local solutions and to communities making that decision than a mandated federal standard.
You know, Senator, I realize that the left side of your party doesn't want clarity on this. But I do think you're going to stay in exile until there's clarity on this. But I don't want to belabor the point. I want to go to the disintermediation of the narrative. I am curious, Senator. I listen to 7 podcasts whenever they come up. Those 7 are Ruthless, Commentary, The Editors, The McCarthy Report, Getting Hammered, Call Me Back, and Megyn Kelly. Those are not in the Salem world. I get no profit from those. That's not highly concentrated. Hugh, it's not Dwayne's world. Of those 7, do you listen to any of them?
No, I don't. And right there might be part of the message about how Democratic elected officials need to broaden the aperture of what media they're listening to and where they're going on. I frankly listen to almost no podcasts. I'm a dinosaur. I still read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, watch the evening news, and, read things like The Economist and Foreign Affairs. And I recognize that part of the message of this election was for voters under 30, that's not where they're getting their news. And so what we're saying, they're not hearing.
Now, Senator, I'm older than you, and I do not miss
by
a half dozen years.
I'm not as flexible and agile as you are, Hugh.
Well, that might be the case, but you're pretty flexible. I've seen you get on the Acela. But do you even know what the Ruthless podcast is?
No, I don't.
All right, so it's the 4 guys all work for McConnell. They're McConnellite people, and they're pros, and they work in politics, and they're funny. It's NC-17, by the way. Commentary Magazine, you must know, and
I
John
do know Tom.
Podhoretz and his colleagues sit down every morning for an hour. This is you guys have Pod Save America, but that's over the left edge of the world, isn't it?
Yeah, I also don't listen to Pod Save America, so.
Well, I'm just curious. Right now, they're having this election for the DNC, and you've got a guy from Minnesota and a guy from Wisconsin and maybe Rahm Emanuel. Are any of those people, I mean, do they inspire confidence in you that they know how to navigate the crumbling of legacy media, which has been, in my opinion, probably not yours, the bulwark of the Democratic Party has been that you've owned the legacy media for so long and now it doesn't matter anymore?
I do think that is one of the core questions on the mind of the folks who will be voting for the next DNC chair is who's got a strategy, who is aware of what this challenge is, who's got a strategy for how to deal with it, and who can move out quickly. Not just to fantasize about, our creating our own podcast or our own, broadcast. There was an attempt at that to create a cable channel to compete with Fox. That's not really the issue. The issue is to meet voters where they are and to listen to them and to listen to the outlets that speak to them. I have 25-year-old twin boys. Both of them listen to Joe Rogan. I don't listen to Joe Rogan. And if I want to better understand what happened in this election and what moved young men, I recognize that folks like me who are considering election and from my party need to be consuming a broader range of media. More importantly, Hugh, it's about doing town halls and connecting with people where they are. The legacy media is no longer what drives our national narrative and is no longer dominant. Trump really was in part made possible. His ascendancy was facilitated by Twitter. And social media and its impact on elections in the United States and globally is something we all have to grapple with and figure out what a TikTok world means. I'll remind you that in countries around the world, we're seeing influence in the outcome of elections using social media that sometimes is just reflecting what the popular will is and what people want, and sometimes reflects action by hostile foreign agents.
Oh, yeah, look, I want TikTok banned. I hope the president-elect doesn't go back on that. But I do think candor and directness and authenticity on issues that divide 80-20 is the only way back for your party. And I don't hear it yet, Senator, but I am awfully glad to have you and Ro Khanna continuing to visit me every now and then so we can talk across the aisle. I appreciate your time this morning. Senator Chris Coons, one of the reasonable Democrats. Wrong but not rotten, as I like to say. Stay tuned, America.